Welcome back to the Motivated Mind Zone. Glad to have you here. Today we're diving into a life chapter, one that honestly it's often approached with a bit of, apprehension. But our sources suggest it's actually fertile ground for some really profound personal growth. We're talking about the transition to living alone as an older man. And let's be real, the starting point for this journey, it's often marked by loss. Maybe the passing of a partner or the quiet finality of a divorce. Or even that echoing emptiness when the last kid finally moves out, that initial feeling, the silence that just drops into the house. It can feel really heavy, almost crushing. The material we looked at, it captures this perfectly. It says, suddenly the silence is louder than the noise ever was.
Yeah, that initial weight of solitude, it's definitely undeniable. And we really have to start by validating that feeling. The routines get broken, those shared histories, they suddenly feel distant. And simple things like making dinner for just one person, it can feel more like a chore than, a comfort. It really forces you to confront the reality that your main way of defining yourself being a husband, maybe a father, a provider within that family structure, well, that's shifted. Maybe permanently.
Right. But that's exactly where this deep dive pivots. Our mission today is to look past that initial shock, that sense of loss, and really identify the profound strength that can emerge. When a man moves beyond just coping with loss to actually embracing the sovereignty of solitude, what if this quiet isn't really an ending, but maybe a vital beginning in disguise? What if all that space allows the man who spent maybe 40, 50 years putting everyone else first, their schedules, their needs, their emotions, what if it allows him to finally completely return to himself?
Exactly. That's the core idea. We're pulling out 9 deeply felt benefits from our source material. We're calling them the quiet gifts. And these are drawn from real life reflections from men who are actually navigating this stage. These aren't just, feel good platitudes. They're grounded realities, transformative insights into what strength looks like when it's not really about external demonstration, but it's lived quietly internally. We want to show you how this solitude, it can actually become a conscious choice for a full self-directed life.
Okay, so let's start where the sources begin. Benefit number 1, true freedom. I find it really fascinating how the material differentiates this. It's not that loud, youthful freedom of your 20s, right?
Yeah.
This is described as a quiet sort of post-60 freedom. So it really distinguishes this earned autonomy.
Well, I think the key difference is maturity and clarity. Youthful freedom that often involves rebellion, maybe some exploration, maybe a bit of recklessness even. But this freedom, the kind we're talking about here, it's really rooted in self-determination and fundamentally peace. It's the freedom that comes from realizing, maybe after decades of structured compromise, that the ultimate decision maker for your day-to-day life, well, it's you. And that's a powerful realization, almost sacred, you could say. And it shows up in these really small daily choices.
Give us some examples of those small choices. Because often we think freedom is, big things, travel, new careers.
Yeah.
But the sources seem to emphasize the microscopic level.
Oh, it's absolutely microscopic, but the cumulative effect is massive. It's things like waking up when your body feels rested, not when an alarm screams at you or when someone else needs coffee made. It's deciding, just on a whim, to have soup for dinner, even though you'd sort of planned on spaghetti, and knowing you don't have to justify that little change to anyone. The really profound freedom is in the absence of that constant low-grade negotiation that just naturally comes with communal living. You can leave a book open on the kitchen counter for 3 days straight because you know you'll get back to it eventually. You can wear the same comfy shirt all weekend if you feel like it. Nobody cares.
That makes perfect sense. It's that constant checking in, that balancing act, the need for consensus on even tiny things that must wear you down over time, even in really good relationships. So just removing that low-level noise, that must feel incredibly restorative.
It's described exactly like that, as healing. Absolutely. We saw this really clearly in one of the reflections from Richard, a retired math teacher. Richard went through a pretty tough divorce after, I think it was 35 years of marriage. And when he first moved into his small apartment, He said he initially felt really constrained. The walls felt too quiet, too close, like they were mirroring back a life he hadn't actually planned for. But then, within about a week, he made this discovery. He realized he didn't need anyone's permission to be a bit messy sometimes, or to just be quiet, or to pursue activities that weren't, productive or useful.
So what were those activities? What did he rediscover for himself?
Well, he mentioned he'd packed away a set of charcoal pencils maybe 20 years earlier, just put them in a box. He started sketching again. Often just simple things like still lifes or the view from his window. And it wasn't just that he'd suppressed the act of sketching, he'd somehow packed away the desire for it too. Even more powerfully, he dusted off this collection of mid-century jazz records. Stuff he'd set aside years ago because his ex-wife found the music, well, too distracting. He started playing these records loud enough to really fill the small space, and he found himself at 67 years old actually dancing in his living room, simply because nobody was watching, and he finally felt he could.
Wow. That quote you mentioned, I didn't know how much of myself I had packed away. That speaks volumes, doesn't it? It wasn't just reclaiming physical space, it was reclaiming identity space.
Precisely. This freedom, it lets you slow down or speed up your own rhythm without needing to check in with anyone. And crucially, it allows you to step outside those defined roles. Partner, parent, provider, you get to live as well, just yourself. After a lifetime of accommodating others, the sources really frame this freedom as something genuine, something earned, and maybe even necessary.
That idea of deep internal quiet leads us right into benefit number two. The idea that the quiet heals what chaos damaged. We often fear silence, don't we? Especially when it's unexpected, we see it as a sign of loss, something missing. But you're suggesting that this initially unsettling quiet is actually a profound mechanism for mending things.
It really is a profound shift in perspective. Think about it. When life is super busy, we use the noise from work, family, social stuff as a constant kind of low-grade distraction. So when that noise suddenly stops, the initial quiet feels threatening because it forces you to confront things, maybe things you've been avoiding. But if you can resist that urge to immediately fill the silence, flip on the TV or the radio, that sharp, unsettling quiet starts to morph. It begins to feel less like an empty echo and more like a warm holding space, almost like sunlight coming through a window on a quiet afternoon.
Yeah, I can imagine for men who spent decades in really active households, maybe overscheduled ones, true silence might feel like a completely alien concept. They might have genuinely forgotten what it feels like to just be in quiet that asks absolutely nothing of them.
That was exactly the case. For Samuel, he was 73. His house was always loud grandkids visiting, the phone ringing constantly, the demands of his career. After his wife passed away, he found the silence just intolerable at first. His first reaction was to fill the air constantly, news on the radio all day, background music always playing. But he eventually realized this wasn't creating peace, it was just replacement noise. It didn't actually soothe anything. The real breakthrough came one morning. He was sitting with his coffee, and he deliberately forced himself not to turn on any appliance, just sit.
What happened then when he finally just sat in that silence?
He said he just watched the steam curling up from his cup in the morning light, and for the first time in years, maybe decades, he could actually hear the internal noise subside. That constant narrative running in your head, what you should be doing, what you should be feeling. It just quieted down. He stopped running that narrative and just felt the simple sensation of breathing. And he had this incredible, really visceral realization. I wasn't broken, he thought. I was just tired.
I wasn't broken, I was just tired. Wow, that line is so powerful because it reframes exhaustion. It's not moral failing, is it? It's just a natural byproduct of chaos.
Exactly right. And the silence acts like a physiological antidote. Our sources explicitly tie this quiet to measurable relief in the body. When those external demands drop away, the nervous system actually settles down. The pole regulates itself. Cognitive scientists point out that sustained exposure to natural quiet allows the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for problem solving, and focus it allows it to relax, to move away from that constant state of threat assessment or high alert. So this isn't about distraction. It's an invitation to actually notice simple beauty again, to hear the rustle of leaves outside or just the sound of your own quiet breath on a cold morning. It creates the space where difficult emotions like grief or regret stop feeling like sharp, immediate wounds and begin to soften into something more like a gentle sadness, something that can be carried rather than a heavy burden that has to be constantly fought against.
Okay, so shifting from the internal architecture of the mind to the external architecture of the home. Benefit number 3. It sounds simple, but it feels immensely important. Your home, your rules, total control over your space. This isn't just about choosing paint colors, is it? It's about a deep psychological comfort and finding meaning in your environment.
It really boils down to the realization that this space belongs entirely to me and I belong entirely here.
Yeah.
Think about decades of shared living, deciding on furniture placement, what stays, what goes, even what temperature to set the thermostat. Every little decision is often a compromise, right? And even silent tension over, say, a misplaced item or a different standard of tidiness that accumulates over time. It creates this subtle feeling of being slightly out of sync, even in your own home.
And the sources really stress that reclaiming this space, it's about meaning, not about performance or showing off. So what defines that meaning in a solo home environment?
It's about agency over your environment, and it's intensely personal. It means you get to keep the books you actually read and love, even if they're dusty or the covers are falling off. It means choosing what smells linger in the kitchen, whether that's a strongly spiced curry you enjoy or maybe the aroma of a cigar you like in the evening. There are no silent judgments floating around, no one else's rhythm you have to constantly adapt to.
You mentioned Leo earlier, the man who created a memory wall. Can you tell us a bit more about how that physical act of setting up his space contributed to his well-being?
Yeah, Leo. He was 70 and he'd moved into this modest 2-room rental. He'd simplified his life quite a bit. And instead of worrying about, filling the house with trendy art or matching furniture, he created his own personal gallery. He used one whole wall just for photos from his time in the Navy, old pictures of his kids when they were little, even ticket stubs from a favorite fishing trip he took years ago with his best friend. And he positioned his old, worn leather recliner, the one nobody else in the family particularly liked, exactly where the afternoon sun would hit it just right. He'd play his old country music from this tiny little speaker, and he realized, he said, no one else would decorate like this, but everything in here makes perfect sense to me.
That's the key phrase, isn't it? Makes sense to me. When your environment aligns with your internal state, it must reduce the cognitive load of just navigating your day.
Precisely. And this connects directly back to those cognitive benefits we touched on. Research shows again and again that having a high degree of control over your immediate environment, even small aspects of control, significantly reduces perceived stress and anxiety levels. When you can live exactly as you wish without constant compromise, you simply spend less mental energy navigating unspoken rules or anticipating someone else's needs or reactions. This reduction in low-grade environmental stress, it really can contribute to improved mental acuity. And as some sources suggest, maybe even slow certain aspects of cognitive decline simply by removing that perpetual low-level friction. The space should feel, as one source put it, like a warm, familiar handshake, just comfortable and right for you.
So, as the external environment starts to align and that internal chaos subsides, the focus naturally turns inward, which brings us to benefit number 4. Rediscovering yourself. The roles that defined you for decades, the provider, the husband, the busy commuter, they start to fall away. What happens when the only person left in the mirror, the only person you really have to answer to, is yourself?
Yeah, this is the critical question, isn't it? And it can be scary at first. Who am I really when no one's watching me perform a role? For decades, maybe, identity was all tied up in external utility. How useful were you? The measure of success was often how well you fulfilled those roles for others. Solitude forces a much more honest accounting. The man has to shift his motivation, maybe from feeling useful to feeling genuinely alive. If he doesn't have to report to a boss or a spouse or show up for a school event, well, who or what does he report to? Maybe just his own curiosity.
So solitude becomes this kind of honest mirror, reflecting back the self that got buried under layers of necessity and responsibility.
Absolutely. Think about Thomas, the meticulous engineer we mentioned. He was 65. His whole identity was wrapped up in precision, schedules, dependability. That's who he was. After retirement and then a divorce happening around the same time, he felt completely directionless. He felt this profound loss of purpose because his purpose had always been external, to fix things, to manage projects, to plan everything out. For weeks, he said, he just sort of drifted. But eventually, the solitude itself kind of compelled him toward the things he'd mentally shelved years ago.
What did Thomas uncover? How did he start defining himself outside of that professional identity?
Well, he'd always secretly wanted to explore philosophy, but he'd always dismissed it as, impractical, not useful for an engineer. So he started reading thinkers who actually challenged his very rigid engineering-focused worldview. He also began journaling, but not to track tasks or project milestones. He started trying to track feelings, which, he admitted, was a terrifying prospect for someone like him. And he bought a cheap, used camera and started going down to the local river at dawn, just photographing the way the light changed the texture of the water, a tiny detail his busy life had never, ever allowed him the time or space to notice before. He said he felt like he was seeing the world again for the first time in years, and crucially, he added, he was starting to see me too. He discovered that beneath the meticulous engineer, there was this deeply philosophical, contemplative, even artistic person waiting.
That's a really beautiful shift, isn't it? It highlights that it's not about fabricating some completely new personality or having a radical reinvention. It's more about uncovering the authentic self that was always there, just waiting beneath the pressure of all those responsibilities.
Yes, exactly. The process of exploration itself, without judgment, without needing to perform for anyone, that is the point. You try things just because they pique your interest, without having to explain their utility or purpose to anybody else. That slow, quiet return to the man beneath the roles, that's really the sacred journey of this particular life stage, according to the sources.
And that journey, it often intersects with a major life factor: money. Which brings us to benefit number 5, financial freedom. Now, as you noted earlier, we need to go a bit deeper than just saying, hey, the money's all yours now.
Yeah.
How does living solo specifically change the structure of financial agency, financial clarity, and maybe the psychological well-being related to money?
Well, for decades, the financial life for most couples is just inherently complex, right? It involves joint decisions, overlapping anxieties about big things like tuition or emergency funds, and just the constant balancing of two potentially different sets of priorities and desires when it comes to spending. Living alone radically simplifies the, let's call it the mathematical structure of finances. But maybe more importantly, it simplifies the psychological weight of money management.
So the freedom isn't just about having the cash. It's about the clarity of its path, knowing exactly where it's going and why.
Precisely. You no longer need to run this complex, multivariate equation in your head every single month. Budgeting becomes much simpler because there are just fewer competing needs to accommodate. And downsizing, which many older men choose to do, isn't necessarily a retreat or giving up. It's often a really strategic move. It significantly reduces overhead costs, letting go of the noise and expense of large properties, of rooms you no longer really need to fill or maintain. This can turn capital from being a source of joint anxiety into becoming a tool for personal agency and peace of mind.
And what about the shift in spending habits? How does money start to reflect personal values rather than, say, status or just survival?
Yeah, that's a key shift. When you no longer need to maintain appearances for a partner or fund all the shared projects of family life, suddenly every dollar spent can reflect a deliberate choice made just for you. You start spending for your own comfort, your own peace of mind, or to pursue a genuine interest. If you decide you want to spend money on that expensive fishing reel you've always wanted, or maybe take a community college course just for fun, or finally get that really comfortable chair for reading, you do it because it genuinely enhances your life on your terms. It's the difference between spending money primarily to maintain a shared structure and spending money to maintain your own spirit.
And the emotional weight attached to that spending, or rather the removal of guilt, that must be pretty substantial.
Oh, it's huge. That's the key psychological insight here, I think. For decades, many men feel obligated or maybe just accustomed to prioritizing everyone else's needs first: college funds, a new roof, a spouse's hobby or career needs before even considering their own desires. He internalizes this constant background question: can I really afford this simple thing for myself given all these other obligations we have? Living alone often removes that layer of guilt, that feeling of constantly putting his own needs last on the list. Money then becomes a tool for self-care, defined entirely on his own terms. It allows him to finally align his spending with his own rediscovered values, without having to mentally ask, will they be okay if I buy this? Before getting himself a book or a decent pair of shoes.
Okay, let's transition now to how all this internal and external clarity impacts mental health directly. Benefit number 6 is framed as better mental health. No more expectations, just peace. Now, that sounds almost, well, maybe a little too optimistic on the surface, but the sources really emphasize that the relief from constant performance is profoundly healing for the mind.
I think it's realistic, actually. Because the major stressor that's being removed is the burden of constant emotional labor and just maintaining those roles day in, day out. For decades, many men feel they have to operate as the rock, right? The stable one, the dependable one, the problem-solving figure who keeps everything together for the family or the partnership. And this requires a constant internal effort, suppressing personal doubts, managing conflict subtly, trying to maintain external harmony, even when things are tough internally.
That sounds like the very definition of chronic, low-grade stress. It's not about one massive crisis, maybe, but that constant drip, drip, drip of vigilance and responsibility.
Exactly. So when that vigilance finally stops, when you wake up in the morning and literally no one is measuring your worth by what you accomplished yesterday or whose crisis you managed to solve, the mind just exhales, it gets a break. The sources describe this as the mind softening, that constant need to explain yourself or justify your choices or anticipate reactions. It just fades away. And that relief, that release from performance pressure, is really the core of the mental health benefit described.
And in this newfound space, simple habits, things that were previously maybe impossible to maintain consistently due to scheduling conflicts or other people's demands, they suddenly become possible and profoundly therapeutic.
Yes, they transform into a kind of medicine, like taking a daily intentional walk, not just as exercise, but as a form of moving meditation, or taking 5 quiet minutes just to focus on your breath. Or even just sitting by the window with a warm drink, simply observing the world outside without any agenda. These simple actions, they gently remind the nervous system that calm can actually be the default state, and that life can be lived in a more natural rhythm, rather than constantly feeling like you're on the defensive or bracing for the next thing.
Okay, but now we absolutely have to address the elephant in the room, the point raised in the critique. Loneliness. It's a real aspect of solitude for many. How do the sources reconcile this promise of better mental health with the undeniable presence of loneliness? How do they define what they call the softer ache?
That's a crucial distinction, and the sources don't shy away from it. They absolutely acknowledge that moments of deep, palpable loneliness will occur, especially during times traditionally associated with family, like holidays or maybe anniversaries. However, they draw a very sharp line between the loneliness that's felt in isolation, when you are physically alone, and the loneliness that can be felt even within a shared environment that's chaotic or unsatisfying. Loneliness experienced within a difficult relationship is often sharpened, made more painful by underlying resentment, by ongoing conflict, or by feeling emotionally neglected. It's that awful feeling of being lonely even when you're in the presence of others.
Ah, okay. So it's not just the presence or absence of other people that matters, but the quality of that presence or the dynamics surrounding it.
Precisely. When you're living in solitude, the ache of loneliness, when it comes, tends to be cleaner, purer in a way. It's a quiet reminder that yes, you're human and humans desire connection. But it's not typically poisoned by the added stress of conflict or the emotional weight of navigating an unhappy arrangement day after day. Living alone provides the necessary physical and, importantly, mental space for the heart to actually begin healing and resetting itself. It allows you to deal with your own emotional realities without the compounding stress of external demands or relationship dynamics. So the loneliness becomes softer, the sources suggest, because it's no longer accompanied by that exhausting pressure to perform happiness or contentment for someone else.
That internal peace and clarity you're describing, it must naturally filter into how you interact with the outside world too. Which leads us to benefit number 7. Relationships become deeper. Less often, perhaps, but more meaningful. Sounds paradoxical, but solitude can actually improve the quality of your connections with others.
Yes, it's a process of refinement, definitely not isolation. That's key. When you're no longer defined by daily proximity to others in your household, those relationships built purely on habit or maybe a sense of duty, the more surface level contacts, they tend to naturally fade away or take a back seat. What remains, or what you then intentionally choose to cultivate, are the relationships rooted in genuine affinity, shared history, and truth. Connection stops feeling like an obligation on your calendar and starts feeling like a cherished gift, something you genuinely look forward to.
So the meetings or calls that do happen, they become more intentional. They're chosen moments of connection, moments of grace almost.
Absolutely. The source reflections really emphasize this point quite dramatically. A phone call from a grown child isn't just an expected part of the weekly routine anymore. It becomes something genuinely anticipated, something you're fully present for and value deeply. A lunch outing with an old friend carries more weight because you both consciously cleared space in your lives for it to happen. The connections become, as one person described it, love without schedule. It's not about frequency, it's about depth.
And the individual's presence within those interactions must change too, right? Because the man isn't constantly drained by his immediate home environment anymore.
That's the core mechanism, I believe. Because he has more internal space, more reserves, he can actually listen with his full attention. He's not running 1,000 simultaneous internal calculations about household logistics or simmering conflicts or just his own exhaustion levels. When someone speaks to him, he can be fully present. He can listen more carefully, maybe pick up on nuances he would have missed before. And he can speak more honestly from his own experience because he no longer needs that relationship to validate a particular role he's supposed to be playing. The entire dynamic of the interaction shifts. It moves away from being rooted primarily in duty, which can be tiring over the long haul, and becomes rooted more firmly in truth and genuine connection. Shared meaning, discovered across those quiet spaces in between visits, becomes the new and perhaps more profound definition of a deep relationship in this stage of life.
Okay, let's move towards the end here, focusing on the tangible strength that comes from managing a life entirely on your own terms. Benefit number 8 is described as the return of confidence and self-reliance. But again, the sources stress this isn't the loud, maybe slightly arrogant self-belief of youth. It's a deeper, quieter, wiser independence forged through successfully handling small, daily acts of competency.
Yeah, that initial phase after becoming solo, it's often defined by frustration, let's be honest. The stubborn jar lid that just won't budge, the confusing Wi-Fi router that needs resetting, managing a new medication schedule on your own, learning how to fix that leaky faucet that maybe a partner always used to handle. These small, practical failures or challenges can be really irritating at first, maybe even a little demoralizing. But the transition happens relatively quickly for most. Every small act of figuring something out, of problem solving on your own, becomes a little victory. And each victory reinforces your sense of capability.
So those small moments, finally fixing the sink, figuring out how to file taxes alone for the first time, organizing the bills efficiently, those aren't just mundane chores then. They're actually exercises in rebuilding self-trust and competence.
They absolutely are. They build what the sources call wiser independence. The man isn't acting primarily to prove he can still do things. That's often more of a youthful bravado thing, right? Instead, he acts simply because he knows deep down he still can manage. And the successful completion of each task reinforces a fundamental internal truth. I am capable. I am grounded. I can handle this.
The sources also mentioned a specific type of strength gained through self-advocacy. How does living alone necessitate that, and how does it build strength in that particular arena?
That's a really important aspect. When you live alone, you automatically become your own primary advocate, especially in crucial areas like healthcare or managing financial and legal affairs. You have to manage your own calendar for appointments. You're the one asking the complex questions at the doctor's office, making sure you understand everything. You have to ensure your own administrative life is clear and organized. This responsibility, while maybe initially daunting, forces a kind of direct engagement with the world that powerfully reinforces independence. An independence that might have been, as one source put it, tucked away beneath years of caring for everyone else. You gain this quiet self-assuredness that's profoundly steady and really valuable in later life, knowing that you can and do manage your own complex affairs with clarity and confidence.
It's like reclaiming that fundamental sense of control over your own destiny, even down to the smallest details of life administration.
Exactly. It's the silent internal confirmation that even though the external roles might have changed dramatically, the fundamental capacity for
And finally, that grounded strength, that quieter confidence, it allows the mind to slow down enough to truly appreciate benefit number 9. Finding joy in the simple things. The idea that as life slows, the ordinary stuff starts to shimmer a bit. It can even feel magical sometimes. Solitude seems to create the necessary pace to finally notice moments that were previously just rushed past or missed entirely.
Yes, this is really where that core shift we've been talking about from seeking external achievement to finding value in internal presence becomes most evident. When you're no longer primarily defined by external validation or keeping up with a busy household, the source of joy naturally moves inward. Those small, quiet moments, they stop being just fillers in between the important events. They actually become the rich texture of a life being fully lived right now.
And we're talking about highly sensory, very quiet moments here, aren't we? Things easily overlooked.
Yes, exactly. Things like the gentle warmth of the sun falling on the kitchen table in the early morning, just noticing it. Or the complex aroma of coffee, really taking a moment to appreciate it without the usual rush to get the day started. Maybe the simple tactile feel of soil in your hands while tending a small plant on the patio. Or the sound of rain on the roof, actually listening to it, rather than just enduring it as background noise or an inconvenience. These moments become profound, the sources suggest, because they are entirely yours. They are unfiltered by someone else's urgency or their distractions or their need for external noise or activity.
They don't require any external validation, do they? No applause needed. They are enough simply because they exist and you're present enough to notice them.
That really is the final definition of joy in solitude offered by this material. You come to realize you don't need the big fireworks of major achievements or the constant noise and activity of a full house to feel genuinely alive or even proud of your life. Joy at this stage is described beautifully as the candlelight of presence. It burns steady and warm, but you have to learn how to sit still enough and quiet enough to truly see it and feel it nourishing you from the inside out.
So we've navigated these 9 quiet gifts of living alone as an older man. From that true earned freedom and the clarity you gain over your physical space,
Mhm.
to the profound emotional healing that can be found in silence and the quiet return of a wiser, more grounded self-reliance. This deep dive into the source material really paints a picture where solitude isn't a lesser state, not a failure. It's actually a profound choice for personal sovereignty and a different kind of strength.
And that choice, it really begins with awareness, doesn't it? So maybe our final provocation for you, the listener, is this. Take a quiet moment sometime today. Look around at your own space, whether you live alone now or perhaps anticipate it down the road. Look at it not with criticism or longing for something else, but just with simple, quiet presence. And ask yourself, does this space feel like a place where I truly live? Does it embody my full current self? Or is it maybe just a place where I sleep and store memories of the past?
Yeah, it's far too easy, isn't it, to let the quiet just be wasted time, to live on autopilot and ignore the small adjustments that could make this chapter not just bearable, but genuinely rich and beautiful. And embracing this potential freedom doesn't require some radical, overwhelming upheaval overnight.
No, absolutely not. It could be something really small to start. Maybe moving your favorite chair closer to the window to catch the sunlight like Leo did. Or finally digging out and playing that old jazz record you loved back in your 30s. And just letting the music fill the quiet for a change. Or perhaps making a conscious choice tonight, just for 10 minutes, to sit with the silence instead of immediately reaching for the remote or the radio.
Living alone isn't a failure or an ending. The sources strongly suggest it's a unique opportunity, a choice for a different kind of strength, a different kind of clarity, and a powerful form of self-definition. Don't let the quiet be wasted. Let it nourish you. Let it reflect the man you are right now, and let it remind you that you are still here, still choosing your path, and absolutely still growing. Thank you for diving deep with us today on the Motivated Mind Zone.